Well, welcome to the session regarding our legal aspects of fundraising, employment law, and role as independent contractors. I think most people don't think of lawyers when we talk about raising funds for our business, when we talk about problems with employee law or independent contracting. Usually employee law, you think of HR department solving it. And in case of independent contractors, probably not a lot of thought is given to that and what they are. So those are the topics we're going to be covering. So let's get started with, first of all, the objectives for the session. First of all, describe applicable types of financing for a financial planning firm. Again, our emphasis is on financial planners, not other fields. Discuss the issues associated with hiring new employees. Understand financial planners' role as an independent contractor. And then finally, describe the ethics issues associated with all of the above. Yes, ethics comes in, even in the areas of finance. So let's take a look at what we got first, which is fundraising for the organization. I don't care if you are in a position where you're going in with a substantial amount of money, or if you're going in with nothing. As a general rule, you find you never have as much money as you think you really need. And probably you don't have as much, even though it may be a substantial amount of money, because it seems like everything always costs more than people anticipate. And of course, we don't really put enough aside for contingencies. In fact, how many of you have budgets, personal or business, that have a contingency reserve of, say, 10%? Very rarely, although it is a very good business practice. Introduction. Although Small Business Administration states that poor management practices are the major reason for business failures, lack of financial resources to pay bills will also result in failures. And I would say why they're consistent is that poor management practices include funding of bills and paying of bills on time. It includes cash flow. It includes marketing. It includes management of personnel. It's a very broad subject when we talk about management practices. And quite frankly, the Small Business Administration has a lot of literature that you can get obtained from them that will be very helpful in your practice as well as helpful for your clients. Some of the brochures I used to get from the Small Business Administration give to my clients because they were really useful for the clients. And I would suggest you think about the same thing. It's only a little bit of time to go to the Small Business Administration, see what they have for you. What I personally would do would be to call ahead of time saying that you're a financial planner that's starting your business or in business for yourself, and you'd like to talk to someone who can assist you. And you'd be surprised on the amount of information they can give you that's very helpful for your field. The practitioner's business plan should have a cash flow component that results in the ability to arrange for borrowing in a timely manner, which is very important, because if you don't have the money on time, you could be bankrupt. For example, failure to pay your taxes, failure to pay employees. And when you don't have money on time, you need it fast, you're paying a very high interest rate if you can get it. And then what to do with excess funds, because there will be times when you have excess funds. Do you just let them in your bank, or do you put them in a CD or a money market account, whatever? That's the type of things that you should cover in your plan. Certainly a CD is only if you're going to have a long-term use of the excess funds. If it's going to be short-term, that you only have a month or two of excess funds, then money market makes more sense. And again, we try to be covering it all in our business plan. Since financial planners are a service organization, it's going to be treated as a personal service corporation if it is a corporation, and it's going to be taxed as such, which means you're going to pay a flat tax of 35% on every dollar you earn. So your company earns $1 this year, it's taxed 35%. If your organization earns a profit of $5 million, you're going to be taxed at 35%. Now, this has been true for some time now, where service organizations will get a flat tax, and I doubt if it'll ever change, because it's sort of accepted by the government as being a good way of handling service businesses. Thus, the key is to do one of the things: either not be taxed as a corporation, because most people have a choice of being taxed as a corporation or as a sole proprietorship / partnership, or if I am going to be taxed as a corporation, that I range so that I'm not in a position of the tax being applied at 35%, and we'll discuss that a little later. Unless one has a large capital base, funding must come from third parties, and investors can come from a limited partnership arrangement where you have people invest in your business and they get a return on their investment to you, or you could sell stock in the S or C corporation. Obviously, S corporation has got so many restrictions that it probably doesn't make sense to try and sell stock unless it's to a relative or a very good friend, where C corporation, you might get investors who see the benefit of investing in a financial planning organization. And if you have less than 95% ownership of, less than 5% of the stock, let's start over again. At least 5% of the stock must be held by non-planners in order to get around the rule of the 35% tax. So I have my sister or my brother who are non-financial planners get involved, and they are thus able to take me out of the position of being subject to the 35% tax. And so if I'm making $1 profit that year, I don't really pay any taxes. And if I'm taking lots of money, I pay a higher tax rate than the 35%. So it's a more equitable. And this applies really for any service organization, except if the law requires the owners of the entity to be practitioners of that field. For example, a law firm can only have lawyers as partners, where a CPA firm could have actuarians, statisticians, HR personnel as their partners. So like financial planners, the CPAs can bring in outsiders to get away from that 35% tax. Some more considerations: if not investors in your business through the corporations and limited partnerships, they are lenders. And the major advantage of borrowing is the interest is tax deductible, where when you're paying dividends, it is not tax deductible. So I would say that for a business starting off, there's a big advantage to paying interest because it's tax deductible if your investors expect to get dividends first thing. Now, if they're not expecting dividends first thing, then of course that's much better because you're not making any payouts, where with interest you're paying from day one. There's two types of loans you can have, the unsecured loans and secured loans. And let's start off with the unsecured loans. Are the most common to practitioners, as a business doesn't really have any assets that can be used as security. Sometimes you put up your house, although I would say your spouse might object to that, because let's face it, the failure rate as businesses are enough that there should be a concern about losing the house. And it might be a investment that you have, such as securities, you could use. But in general, it's going to be loans where you don't have any assets that you're willing to put up. And it's most common. You're not alone. Most companies have unsecured loans to get started. Where do we get those unsecured loans? First of all, friends and relatives are always a good source. There's always grandpa who's got a little money saved up, and or maybe a friend or a relative who has been successful and maybe won the lottery or is a business executive, and they can make loans to you. You can have a limited partnership, which we mentioned before, in which you have interest paid to the partners who are willing to invest with you. And the one I was involved with is if the company made a profit, they would pay out, and I believe it was 9% interest. And if they didn't make a profit, then they didn't pay out anything. Well, 9% was substantially higher than what I could get anyplace else. So I figured, well, if, let's see, 3 out of 4 years or 3 out of 5 years, I'm getting 9%. It's better off than investing in a bank or bonds, so I went ahead with it, and turned out the investment I had made, which was in a housing dormitories at Cal State Fullerton, turned out to make a profit every year, so I did very well on it. But again, you could have wound up in a position where making the investment could have lost money every year, and I got nothing for my investment. A third is credit card. It's a nice unsecured loan. Interest rates are substantial, though, as high as 23, 24% compounded. Unions occasionally will provide loans, especially if you're willing to have your employees become members of the union. And I've had two clients who, small businesses in manufacturing, needed money to be raised, and I suggested they talk to the local unions, and the unions made a deal. You make your employees all members of the union, and then we'll make a loan to you at a very attractive rates. I think the first 2 years or 3 years was no interest, and then he had 5 or 7 years to pay it off. And the unions saved a lot of money because they didn't have to spend a lot of money recruiting the people and getting the election made and fighting the company. So they were very happy, and they got a good deal out of it. And he got a good deal. He got giving up control of his employees in exchange for keeping his business solvent. And that's happened twice with me, where I've seen this happen. Some insurance companies also lend unsecured loans to small businesses. They do want substantial interest, sort of like the credit card, or even higher. Some secured loans that are realistic for a financial planner practitioner would be banks and credit unions. And I think the thing that you got to remember here is they lend money, they don't take risk. So as far as they're concerned, they're going to get their money back. They're just lending it to you. If there's risk involved, they're not interested. And that's why typically it's got to be secured. Occasionally you can get a SBA loan, and the SBA loan, some of them are where it's government guaranteed. Part of the interest is guaranteed to the bank or credit union. Other cases it's not. But SBA loans tend to be relatively short term. They're also primarily designed for minorities and disadvantaged businesses, although occasionally you'll find that you'll be able to get a loan through them. Then, well, I'd say you got nothing to lose. You want to make contacts with the Small Business Administration anyhow, going in to get their information about management. Well, ask them about what kind of loans they can recommend these days for your company. Next is some insurance companies, which have secured loans, and there are a lot more than have unsecured loans, and the interest rates are a lot lower. As a general rule, if you want to get a secured loan, you have to have good credit scores for the company and for the owners. And if the credit scores are down, quite honestly, you're going to have to get secured loans. Unsecured is a real challenge with the poor credit ratings. And let's face it, a lot of times the company has a poor credit rating because it just hasn't had the money it needed. Unsecured loans, let's talk a little more about them. If you're late in payments, you might get sued, but you still got the funds. And that's one thing I remind people when they're talking about, geez, I make a loan and the payments are due on the 30th of every month. I said, what happens if you delay it to the following 15th of the month? What do? They can't take the loan, your assets away. All they got to do is wait. They may charge you a little bit more interest. They may call a loan, but again, it's unsecured, so you don't really have anything to lose. You must pay higher interest rates, obviously, to the risk involved. And by paying higher interest rates, that's going to create issues with your cash flow. And so one of the things you have to think about if you do decide to have unsecured loans, to increase the difference between your incoming and outgoing cash to reflect the fact that you're going to be spending more. Remember, interest is tax deductible, and so that can work for your benefit too if you're making money. If you're not making money, that can harm you if you're a corporation, because corporations cannot take losses on the tax returns. And that's a good reason why you might want to consider S corporation, which allows you to take the losses, provided you are an active participant in the business. Usually only small amounts can be borrowed from each source on unsecured loans, so typically you're going to get 2, 3, or 4 of them. And as I mentioned, they tend to be short-term loans. So most common probably, and again, you're going to have to get it from multiple sources in many cases. Secured loans, contractual, therefore you might lose the assets if payments are late. In fact, in most cases you will lose the assets if payments are late. Again, if you know that you're going to be late, you can usually work out something with the lender. But I've seen where lenders 2 or 3 days after the loan payment was due, they would take action through the court system and start the action to take the assets that are supporting the loan. Interest payments are lower due to assets used to guarantee the performance. Lends use of the assets because you can't sell them and use them outside the terms of agreement. Sometimes the lender will say, okay, I will lend you money to buy asset X, but you can only use it on my equipment until you pay off the loan. And that's, for example, you might have a customer who is large and wants to be able to control, for example, the software you're using. And some of the software today is quite expensive, let's face it. And he wants or she wants it to be used strictly for them for as long as you still have that loan. And I would say you should always have an attorney review the terms of any agreement for a secured loan, or really unsecured loan too. Any of these agreements should be in writing, and you should get advice and assistance from an attorney. If you don't, you're probably putting yourself in further risk of going under, because quite honestly, lenders are smart. They know how to word things so that it's to their advantage in all cases. I might talk a little bit about using angels and venture capitalists. That's always the answer, it seems, that I hear when I go to conferences. Unfortunately, or fortunately, neither of them want to be interested in financing financial planning firms because you're too small and you don't make enough money. And the reason I say it's fortunate, because typically you lose your business when you have an angel or venture capitalist. You lose it to those people because you can't meet the metrics that they have, and therefore they take over the business. Or if they don't take over the business, if you don't meet the metrics, they pull out, and that's even worse in many places. And if you are approached by either an angel or venture capitalist, get your attorney involved immediately so that you can make sure you don't do something dumb. They are very persuasive. I have a former brother-in-law who is a venture capitalist up on the San Mateo area, and he has been very successful in convincing small businesses that have a big potential of letting him, in effect, take over the financial aspects of the companies. And for a period of time, he's taken over the companies. So, and I looked at and going to Menlo Park and those areas up there where there are a lot of venture capitalists, they all tend to wind up owning the businesses. And so always be sure you get your lawyer to protect you. There are alternatives to venture capitalists and angels, so let's talk about some of them. Taking on a partner in a partnership or adding owner investors to a corporation. That would be another approach. Usually people come in, if I only got $50,000 to start my business and another person has $50,000, that's $100,000, which is much better than $50,000. The second thing is low cost of additional funds, which compliance with federal and state laws in setting up the business, the entity, is important, and that be through, again, the use of the partnership or corporation, because you're not paying interest, and the only thing is dividends will be paid eventually, or profits will be paid out, but that's in the future when you're making a profit, because all the parties who are the partners or investors in the corporation have a vested interest in making the business a success before trying to get money out. It does reduce your control because you now have to share control with other parties unless you're made the managing partner or the managing I forget the term right now, but in the corporations, you can have a managing executive who is controlling the company, and that allows you to keep control. Again, you should check with your attorney on whether or not in your state where you're incorporated or you're doing a partnership, they're allowed, because they can be, so that you don't give up your power in the partnership or in the corporation. Again, the other side may not agree with you. And if it's a general partnership, of course, the risk associated with partners, where you have partnership, typically you should be the dumbest, the most unlucky, the one putting in the least money, having the least personal assets, etc., because things always go wrong, and if a partner makes a mistake, you are going to suffer, even though you were innocent. And advantage of bringing people in as partners is you can look like a bigger company. That's one of the reasons I like limited liability companies. We can take 3 or 4 entities, put them together, have a bigger capital base, and we look bigger and we look more professional to the third parties and our clients. And that's important. And many times that's what makes a success. So let's say 3 of you getting together, you each are going to run your own firm. But if you're a limited liability company, you're able to do that, and you're able to look like one company, even though you're 3 independents, and you're able to add your money together in a bigger pool of investment. So it's a good idea. Lines of credit, let's talk about for a minute. Every business should have a line of credit with a bank or credit union. First of all, it reduces the time to obtain funds when you need it. It's surprising how today the bank account is full and then 2 days later it's empty. We need to get funds fast. Also, you get better interest rates if you have a line of credit. And finally, it actually helps your credit rating to have a line of credit. The disadvantages, lenders constantly want updates on your business performance. I mean, they're serious about that. Some are more so than others. I have a client right now who has a bank loan with a major bank. He's always dealt with local banks, and he's had a lot of flexibility with them. But he failed to meet one of the metrics last month, and the bank said they're going to call a loan. And he had, I believe, 10 days to fix the problem. Well, that wouldn't happen with the small banks he dealt with who were local. But the big banks were much more insistent. So you got to be careful on the banking again. And I can't say your lawyers can help you on that part other than looking at the agreement the bank wants and tell you if it makes sense. And if you don't meet the covenants, not only do they pull a loan, but they pull your credit line. And that many times forces a company out of business. Let's look a second at government involvement. And this is if one is planning on a limited partnership is subject to state and federal regulations, legal assistance is an absolute requirement. There's so many rules that deal with limited partnerships, not only in the area of administration but taxation, that you should really get a good looking at it, get legal advice giving you the benefits and disadvantages of the limited partnership. I've invested in limited partnerships, and fortunately for me, they were successful. But I'm not sure I would want to have a limited partnership for my business, because I have to put up with people who expect to get interest income every year, and that may not be occurring. Likewise, issuing a limited liability company rather than a limited partnership or corporation and selling interests or shares is subject to federal and state laws. And again, you need to have legal assistance on it. Next thing we want to talk about is the ethical issues. Compliance with ethical standards of the CFP board and any associations where the owners are members in dealing with third parties, and that might be the ethics standards of the, say, Chamber of Commerce, the local financial planning association, etc., that you're dealing with in addition to the CFP board. And I think one of the things that I have done in my practice is we list all of the ethics standards required by the board, by the associations we belong to, etc., in our office directive, which applies to all of our employees, so that the employees have to look at it. Every couple of months we would have a half-hour session where we reviewed the topics so that the people were reminded of the fact that we had these ethics standards and the ethics requirements we had to meet. I would say by far the most complicated I've run into is the CFP ethics standards and rules and discipline. Very professional, and unlike some organizations, the CFP board does enforce it. And a second point in the ethical area is failure to make payments on time has a major effect on credit ratings. It can make it impossible to borrow in the future. And that's really an ethics issue of paying on time. I know some people who have a practice of always paying a little late, and then try to negotiate it out of it. And that, to me, is an ethical issue. Again, ethics is very personal in this type of thing. For some people, that is the way to do business. For other people, paying on time is the way to do business. And that's what we'll cover as far as ethics for this particular topic.